Doctor Who, The Secret History.
At this moment, I can remember how this whole journey turned out because I've lived through it before. But as soon as I step out of the TARDIS, the timelines will change. It'll be me who does all this, and I won't remember what happened the first time around because it won't have happened yet.
I didn't expect this.
There he is, the blonde one.
You're quite sure this doctor is a Persian spy?
Good day, fellow YouTubers and Doctor Who fanatics, to another Big Finish audio review. And today I'll be taking a look at the 200th Big Finish multi-range release and the last story from the Locum Doctor's trilogy, The Secret History by Eddie Robson, which stars Peter Davison as the 5th Doctor, Maureen O'Brien as Vicki, and Peter Purves as Stephen for this full cast audio drama. So if you want to go straight to the review and don't want to see how this audio is showcased, then there's the time. If you haven't skipped, let's begin the video. So for the cover we have up here 200th Big Finish Doctor release. They could have put monthly release. Anyway, it's nice to have that on there. I think they put that on there later on, as on the Big Finish website it just said brand new adventures and full cast audio drama. It didn't have that up there. So I think they added that on later on when designing the cover. If we have the 5th Doctor by here, 2 Medusa heads, we have Ravenna in the background with the arena, we have a quad horse battle cart. And if you can see quite closely in the background, you can see the 5th Doctor's and 1st Doctor intro segment. It's a nice cover by Tom Webb, so not my favourite out of the 3. So for the side of release, we have the 5th Doctor picture by there, Doctor Who, The Secret History. There's that almighty 200, and the Big Finish logo by there, and there's a black spine. And for the back, it is directed by Barnaby Edwards. It's nice to see him direct. And then we have the blurb on the story, which I'll place in the description. We have the cast featured in the story, and I am covering my thumb, as it gives away the villain on the back, so I'm just going to cover it up. And there's 120 minutes approx, including behind the scenes. So inside we have of course the booklet and the disc, and like the 1st Doctor era, it names each of the episodes. So part 1 is the Gothic War, part 2 is the Last Roman, part 3 is the Catastrophe Cure, and part 4 is the Twists of Fate. And we have advertisements for other 5th Doctor releases, such as the first trilogy they did, which is the Key to Time trilogy, and the 2014 trilogy, which is the most recent trilogy featuring the 5th Doctor and Nyssa standalone. So we have the leaflets. For some reason I was expecting a bigger booklet, but yeah, I guess I was wrong. Maybe because it was the 200 release, so I was expecting some cool stuff to be in it, but no, it's still a leaflet and it's going to be staying like this. But anyway, we won't get into that. And the next installment, which is 201 of course, We Are the Daleks, which I have listened to, won't say anything on it. Doctor Who magazine, production credits, and you can flip it over if you desire for the 5th Doctor variation. Alright, now to the review of The Secret History. And it was the one I was least looking forward to out of the trilogy. The other two just intrigued me more, that's the only reason. But yeah, I've released my reviews on them, and you know, they did turn out underwhelming, especially Last Assignment, as I wanted that one to be the best. So I've been rather pessimistic on this one, expecting it to have another bad outcome like the other two. But at the same time, I was hoping this one will deliver a satisfying end, especially when it's marked 200. And yeah, in this story, it's the 5th Doctor taking the 1st Doctor's place, and like all the Locum Doctor stories, the companions react to the Doctor. But yeah, except that it's the Doctor quite quickly than Joe Grant and the Defectors. So we will begin the in-depth review of the story part by part, of course starting with part 1. And I wanted them to do something in all these stories, but for some reason they didn't. And Peter Purves was in this audio, so we could have done a little scene with the 1st Doctor. As at the start of this, they are fleeing from aliens, so we could have had the 1st Doctor fleeing with them, and he'll be the first one in the TARDIS, and Stephen and Vicki are at the back. And then when they get in, the 1st Doctor isn't there anymore, and then replaced by the 5th Doctor. So we could have had a little scene just with the 1st Doctor. Also, Fraser Hines, as I said, could have done a little bit of an introduction to the 2nd Doctor in that one, and added Tim Trello for a little line in the Defectors, but no, they didn't do that. It's not a huge criticism, of course, it's just something, a nice little addition which I think would have really worked. Anyway, I'm not too fussed about it really. And it's also nice that they use the themes which corresponds to the era and not the Doctors. They don't play the 5th Doctor theme in this audio, they play the 1st Doctor one, and it goes the exact same with Last Assignment and Defectors. Yeah, I think Eddie Robson picked a good historical event, which is Italy, and the Doctor, Vicki and Stephen land in Ravenna. And this is with the Roman army, as Ravenna refuses to surrender to the Roman army. The crowd gets rather crazy and quite serious, and the Doctor and the companions are tied into the situation. Yeah, quite early on in the story, something happens to Stephen, and he is separated from the Fifth Doctor and Vicki. And that does lead into a slight problem, as the Fifth Doctor didn't get as much listening time with Stephen, or in other words, interactions with each other, so that's a little shame, as I think they would have worked quite well with each other, as Stephen did accept that the Fifth Doctor is in fact the Doctor. But what happened to Stephen is actually very interesting. I find it one of the highlights of the story, as he meets a character called Quintus, who is one of my favourite characters in this audio and one of the most interesting ones, with some good interactions with Stephen, who gets along very well, as he is sent to Constantinople to get hold of money and get back to Ravenna. So I find that actually one of the most interesting parts of the story. Even though that the Fifth Doctor and Vicki are doing more of the main stuff of the story, I don't know why I found Stephen's the highlight of part 1. I don't know why, but I just found it very fun and enjoyable. So yeah, part 1 is what you expect. It's a standard historical story, which is good, and it does feel like the First Doctor's era. Yeah, for the most part, part 1 is actually very enjoyable, and I did get this as a free download when you subscribe to Big Finish newsletter, so I did get this early on and really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it even more re-listening to part 1 when I got the CD. Yeah, I find part 1's a good setup, especially where Stephen's going and the Doctor and Vicki doing the main stuff of the story. Yeah, another thing with part 1, if you listen quite carefully and you really focus on it, it does lean somewhere quite predictable. Some you may miss it, but I think some will catch it, as some of the dialogue gives it away and makes you think, that's a bit odd. Now we are at part 2 and part 3. I'm going to cover these at the same time, as they're pretty much quite similar and a bit different from part 1. But yeah, as part 2 approaches, it is written quite differently and does change a lot. Yeah, the good pure historical stuff was paused quite abruptly, and afterwards that's all the sci-fi stuff just creeps into the story. But again, not that impressive personally. And part 3 is the exactly same as part 2. But I would say there's a lot more intriguing stuff happening with the main plot of the story, which again grabbed my attention back again, so yeah, that was good. So yeah, part 2, it like went down a little bit to sink the story, but part 3 was getting back up again. So I was thinking, maybe this will lead to something, because I'm actually getting interested. So yeah, part 3 stands out a lot more than part 2. And part 4, the final moments of the story. The Locum Doctors was building up all to this, and was it satisfying? I would say part 4 is the worst part of this entire story. And I would say the entire Locum Doctors trilogy, it was very unsatisfying. It not only does cripple this story, but I think it cripples the entire trilogy. Again, I can't really go into spoilers that much, because part 4 you really need to experience yourself, but it's nothing to get excited about. And I had that feeling I wanted the story to end, and you have that feeling saying, come on, end already. I was in that sort of mood. So I guess in a way that this did have the Curse of the Harnels, because part 1 was my favourite part. It was quite fun in a lot of places. I like the historical storytelling, and Stephen had an interesting part. Now that was my overview of the story from start to finish. Now I'll be going over the characters, starting with the main cast. It's nice that they had the Fifth Doctor, Vicki and Stephen, because I think they work very well. Probably my favourite mashup of all the 3 stories, even though I do love Colin Baker and Fraser Hines together. This one just works very well. But yeah, in all of the stories, they all work together very well. That's definitely a positive about the Locum Doctors trilogy. Mainly the Fifth Doctor's performance is strong in this story. However, there are other Fifth Doctor stories which I have on my mind, and I would say I can listen to that one over this one. But of course, he is brilliant as the Doctor, is definitely improved. Next is Vicki. Again, good performances and brilliant interactions with the supporting characters such as Procopius and Belisarius. During the early stage of the story, around about part 1 and part 2, is quite nice. And also references a lot of First Doctor stories such as the Romans, etc, etc. Especially some funny stuff in the Romans as well. And also I forgot to mention, this Doctor Who story does mention quite a few BBC books. One of them spring to my mind, which was Byzantine, also a story featured in Italy. and Stephen, who I really enjoyed in this story. I loved his part of the story where he goes to Constantinople. I do find him a very underrated companion. He's actually one of my favourite 60s companion, and what he does in this story is one of my favourite moments of it, as I've said. I am leaning towards getting a few of his companion chronicles because he is very good in this one, and also the Bounty of Sirius. Now, supporting characters, unfortunately, I found some of them just quite forgettable, to be honest. There was quite a load on the back of the CD as the cast list, but some of them don't play huge roles whatsoever. There's only really 6 which stick out. I guess the main ones would be Quintus, Justinian, Procopius, Belisarius, Sophia and Theodore, and no one else, to be honest, and also including the villain. Quintus is definitely the most interesting one, and also Procopius. Others I found a little bit forgettable. Theodore was quite annoying in part 2, I will say. And Justinian, being the Roman Emperor, didn't really play a massive role, but they were well casted and played their parts very well. Best performer in this story, I will give it to Peter Purvis, which is Stephen. I think he was the best, and his part of the story was my favourite moment of the Secret History, so Stephen gets the best performance in this story. Now, what is my final verdict on the Secret History? Yeah, it's a bit of a letdown, to be honest. Part 1 I really enjoy. That's just a fantastic first part, and yeah, the best part of this story. Then part 2 it just dips down a little bit. Part 3 tries to build it back up, but then left a very unsatisfying part 4. It's definitely not the worst story I've ever listened to, no, but it's not a story I would class it as a special release or the 200th monthly range release. It doesn't deserve that title. So the Secret History gets a 6 out of 10. That might be quite of a mean rating, but that's personally where I want to go with it, as I think even 6.5 or 7 is too high for it, because originally I was leading to a 5, but no, it's a lot better than average. It's slightly above average, I'll give it that much. So I hope you enjoyed my review on The Secret History. Now I'll be going over the Locum Doctor's trade, just like I did with the Entropy Plague review. I made my thoughts on the trilogy. And the Locum Doctor's trilogy did do stuff right, but did quite a lot wrong. The one thing it did right is to get us hype. Big Finish really did hype this release, not only that it is leading to the 200th monthly range release, but also the idea of it. Of swapping Doctors and putting, of course, the 7th Doctor in the 3rd Doctor era, the 6th Doctor in the 2nd Doctor era, and the 5th Doctor in the 1st Doctor era, as the Doctor's time stream has been affected by someone or something. So yeah, that idea sounds brilliant. Writing that on paper, it sounds brilliant. It's something new and sort of original, yeah, so it makes perfect sense why this one was hyped. So the only thing we were hoping is that it won't get ruined by the hype. Yeah, that's what Big Finish got right with this trilogy. However, how it was executed, it just wasn't well executed. None of the stories actually feel like their era is supposed to be. The Defectors doesn't really feel like a 3rd Doctor story to me. It is set on Earth, but for me it didn't feel like a John Pertwee 3rd Doctor story. I think it tried in some places. I can see it creeping in, but throughout it just didn't really feel like it, and UNIT needed to be involved much more because they were only pretty much in the distance. Last of the Cybermen didn't feel like a 2nd Doctor story to me. Has to be Base Center Siege, and I would have captured it straight away, but no, it isn't Base Center Siege. A good choice to feature the Cybermen, but a Base Center Siege Cyberman story would have done it a lot better. And the Secret History, well, I can let this go as it is leading into a sci-fi sort of thing to find out who's the one causing all this. So yeah, I accept that, but part 1 does feel like a Hartnell historical, so that's good enough. So yeah, the one that captures the era the most, I would say, would be the Secret History. Then the Defectors, it slightly does it in places. Last of the Cybermen, I don't think does it at all. Another issue is the choice of writers, to be honest. I would have picked totally different writers. I would probably leave Nicholas Briggs in here, as sometimes he can produce very good work. Dark Eyes, for example, so I would leave him in there. Alan Barnes I wouldn't place in there, in my personal opinion, as he's not one of my favourite Big Finish writers, and he doesn't really have a story which I would say, wow, that's magnificent. I haven't had an Alan Barnes story like that so far. I would personally put Kevin Scott and Mark Wright in the Cyberman story, because I find their writing brilliant. Like the Project Stories, Masters of Earth. They've done some wonderful magnificent stories. And Eddie Robson, yeah, he can go both ways really. John Dorney really needed to have the 200 story, or at least one of the stories in the Locum Doctors trilogy, as he's a brilliant writer. Or Jonathan Morris, but he's written The Entropy Plague and We Are the Daleks, so it'd be too much for him. So yeah, I think John Dorney really needed to have at least one of them. Yeah, to conclude on this trilogy, it was something which looked good on paper, but again, the way it was executed, it just didn't work, and I find this trilogy rather forgettable, and I don't think I would really like to revisit it. There'll just be some other things on my mind. I would gladly listen to the East Space trilogy over this, and I personally find that trilogy a lot more better and well executed, as they feel like East Space stories. I don't really like talking about underwhelming stuff. I don't like doing that at all. I like talking about the great stuff, which Big Finish usually always do, because they're fantastic. But yeah, unfortunately this trilogy wasn't really what I wanted it to be. But yeah, that's just to put my honest opinion out there. So I would rate the Locum Doctors trilogy, I guess, just like in the Entropy Plague review for the East Space trilogy. It's a 5 out of 10, it's completely average. There's nothing really stand out about it, to be honest. And also, you can get the story standalone, because you can get Lass as Sidemen, and you don't really need to get the Defectors to understand it, so you could pretty much get the secret history, and that's it. So you can pick and choose in this trilogy. But yeah, that's all I wanted to cover. I will close off this review right now, because it's probably going to be quite long. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one for We Are the Daleks. Goodbye, and have a good one.